record privileges as well, Heidi? So we'll get a double recording just in case. Love it. Thanks.
Kristen, I'll make you co-host. So welcome. I'm going to make Daniel a co-host. And I'm going to share my screen for a brief moment while we talk about coaching agile journeys. So we're here today to talk about the Open Leadership Symposium and the Open Leadership Series. So this is going to be part one with Daniel Mezick, scaling employee engagement. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about coaching agile journeys, but this is Daniel Mezick's session for scaling employee engagement. We do have 3 more upcoming sessions. So look for those and go to our website at coachingagilejourneys.com/openleadership to register for those sessions that you're able to attend. So who are we? I'd love to know if this is your first time here, post it in the chat if you just found us. So we have a lot of regular people come back again and again to our Coaching Agile Journeys community, but your co-hosts are Isaac Garcia, Jeff Coors, myself, Lori Townsend, who's unable to join today, Mark Kruth, who's on the road, and Kristen Hernandez, wave your hands. We're just volunteers, so we do this because we love to learn, and we decided that we wanted to share our journey with others. So we've been finding topics for almost 3 years now, and we have a lot of different things on our website. So please go to our website. I didn't update these slides, but we do have a brand new podcast. So go to our website and you'll find our podcast where we have questions that we weren't able to get to in all of our sessions. And then we go back and we answer them in the podcast. So we just launched that. I'm super excited about the podcast. And so if Coaching Agile Journeys has made a difference in your life, please consider supporting our work. Click buy us some coffee and donate. It helps us keep up the website and the events and the tools like we use like Zoom and Podbean and so forth. So this session in this series is a result of our survey. We conducted a survey, so thanks if you actually contributed to the content for the survey and responded. People loved Daniel Mezick's session and similar speakers, so they wanted him back. We asked that question and they voted for that. They said that noon Eastern time on Mondays was good, but noon in general was a good time. So we have we're going to be planning more sessions on Mondays at noon. And people wanted topics related to coaching, agile leadership and management, culture, continuous improvement, resistance, and the future of work. So we're bringing you all these topics and more simply because of your feedback. So thank you so much for that feedback. It really helps us grow in the direction to help the community in the best way. And if you have a moment to check out the Open Leadership Symposium that's taking place in Boston, go to openleadershipnetwork.com and check out our work there. So I am going to I'm going to end the show and I am going to stop sharing for now because let me find Daniel Mezick on the screen. And is he back yet?
I'm here.
There you are. I am going to turn it over to Daniel Mezick. So excited that you're here today. Thank you so much. We are going to talk about open leadership and scaling employee engagement.
Thank you very much, Heidi, and thank you very much for this forum. And also, thanks to each person here. It's my privilege and pleasure to be here with you all today. And how long do we have, Heidi, all together?
We have until 1 o'clock sharp.
Until 1 o'clock. Okay, so what I'd like to do is kind of open with some basic fundamental concepts in facilities, and then kind of direct you to maybe a couple of web links that you can explore later. And then open it up for questions, right? That's really what I want to do. So the whole second half of this, like at least 20 minutes, if not more, I just want to take questions, right? So here's the first thing. The first thing is there is a mound of data that is coming from the Gallup organization, 30 years of data, 3 million employees. Can you see this screen right here when I share it? Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah? So go to the Gallup organization. What I did there was I Googled Gallup employee engagement to get this page, and just go and get a sense of the data, okay? Here's the data. The data says that employee engagement is associated with a higher stock price. It's associated with more business growth, and a whole slew of positive business outcomes, including delighted customers, employees who become sort of HR promoters, people ops promoters. They bring the best people into the company, their own friends. And the whole thing just thrives on itself, right? So it also goes the other way. Gallup has done polls that show that people are literally 75% of the people are disengaged at work, and like half of those are actively disengaged. That is, they are working against the stated goals of the organization. That's a crime. So I'm establishing here that employee engagement is essential. The Agile frameworks don't have anything to say about engagement, and if they do, they don't offer any guidance on how to get it. It's almost like magic happens here, except that it doesn't. Okay? So all of us are involved in Agile in one way or another. We all have a sense of this. So the real question is, how do we get more employee engagement? So I have some ideas about this. I think it has to do with employee decision-making. And if decision-making falls below a certain threshold, you are going to get declines in psychological safety, declines in engagement, and declines in all the other things that are good, right? So I've got this diagram here that I want to show you. A little bit of a complex diagram. This shows basically if high authorized people are making decisions, as we move through time, but they don't go over this red line, that there's enough decisions being generated elsewhere to keep people engaged, right? But if they go above this red line and they make one too many decisions, like maybe team level decisions when the team should be making, then you get this behavior. You get exponential decay in engagement, and you get exponential decay in psychological safety when they go above this certain threshold, okay? So what we need to do is we need to distribute decision-making, but not just for that reason. The main reason that we want to refactor decision-making is we want to align decisions with the flow of value, because that's the name of the game in teams. I'm going to offer you a challenge. Here's what it is. I have a hypothesis that most of your biggest impediments revolve around who's making key decisions and when. If you align decisions with the flow of value, things get better. So we have a decision-making schema in our organization. It was valid once in, long ago, maybe as long as 6 months ago, but things change very quickly. And if you don't align the decision-making to support the flow of value, it's going to impede the flow of value, okay? So a lot of you shaking your head yes, and I can see that this is resonating with you. I'm going to offer you a dramatic and somewhat heretical hypothesis, okay? If you want great results, you need to invite people to make decisions. So every invitation prompts a decision. Isn't that interesting? So here's a little diagram. If you want great results, you need self-management, okay? Self-management is what gets you great results. And I have never seen self-managed teams that weren't engaged. So these two things go hand in hand. If you want great results, you need these two things. To get them, people need to be engaged in decision-making. So engaged in what? Engaged in decision-making that pulls them in. And lastly, every invitation prompts a decision. So if you want great results, your leaders need to mix in invitation with their delegation. Okay? Now I'm going to send you to a certain link. I wrote this book. We published it. Mark Sheffield and I published, Mark's our co-author. We published this book in December. This book has sample writing, and you can find that right here. The website is invitingleadership.com. Can everyone see that? That share?
Yes.
If you go to sample chapters, which is this page right here, I'm going to put this in the chat for you. There's a very, very good article there, The Delegation of Responsibility Without Authority. And you can go there and get that later. This particular thing is really important. Here's why. We're running a business, delegation has to happen every single day. But if we weave in some invitation with the delegation, we're going to get some improvement in what we're measuring. Here's why. Because invitation puts people on a decision to go somewhere or do something. And when that happens, it engages people. Now, a lot of your Agile teams are not going to engage because they don't want to be accountable and they don't want to be responsible. Because before Agile, they didn't have to be accountable or responsible. You know, the big bosses told them what to do, which takes us off the hook as team members. So there's this sort of myth that big bad executive management is oppressing teams. Yeah, that might be true, but here's what's also true. Teams are pushing it right back on executives and saying, you decide, you tell me what to do, and then I'm not responsible or accountable. So there is a dual thing that's going on there, okay? Now, when you engage in invitation, what happens there is it prompts a decision. So Coaching Agile Journeys invited you to this event today. Is anyone here under coercion or under force? Was anyone forced to attend? Show of hands. Anyone forced to attend Coaching Agile Journeys today? Well, one guy, yeah, okay. Jeff's raising his hand. All right. So what I'm getting at is, you know, invitations prompt a lot of engagement. Invitations also create something I call a micro authorization. So if Heidi invites me to come and talk here and I haven't yet decided, what happens next is up to me. She might give me an RSVP, like a deadline or something, but I make the next move. Okay, so this is very, very strong. So most authority is about authority to decide. So I want you to think about, when you think about authority, think of it like this: authority to make decisions that affect the whole group. That's called leadership. So if I'm in on those decisions, I'm a leader, okay? So your authority distribution system drives your culture. So this is about culture. I'm going to make a comment here about culture. If you want to change culture, I want you to change the arrangement of who decides for the group. Why? Because this dictates communication paths. Say I report to Heidi and I go talk to Jeff, who's at her level. Here's what Heidi says to me in a dysfunctional organization. Don't go around me, Daniel. Whatever you tell Jeff, you better tell me first. Ever heard that one? This is exhibit A in my argument that the communication paths ride on top of the authority schema, okay? So this determines this, and then these cultural pathways, you know, the communication pathways dictate the culture. So culture rides on top of the communication highway, so to speak. So if there's limited dead-end streets, there's going to be limited dead-end culture, okay? If the communication's open, you're going to have open culture. If it's closed, you're going to have closed culture. Okay, so this other thing, policies and procedures, I'm going to just defer discussing that for now. But let's just say this: if you want to change culture, change the way decisions get made that affect the group as a whole, because that's going to affect this, and that culture rides on top of that. Here, let me give you an example. Scrum is a prefabricated way of making decisions. It's a sort of in a box. So here's one of the rules. For the product owner to be successful, everyone in the organization must respect his or her decisions. So there it is. You don't do that, you do not get the culture that Scrum generates. So that's exhibit A in my argument, that if you want to change culture, change the authority distribution. Who decides? Who has decision rights? Okay? So if you weave in some invitations, like as a coach, if you invite the teams to do this or that, you'll get much better results. Why? Because this is what goes on in their head when you invite them. And say you invite them to a meeting. Who else is going? Are my friends going? What will I miss if I don't show up at Coaching Agile Journeys? What will I receive if I do show up? These are all the questions that get in people's heads. So when you invite people, you literally get in their head, you get mind share. Okay? Now, I have a hypothesis I'm going to offer, and then I want to open it up to a couple questions before I go a little bit further, okay? We're having the wrong conversations in the Agile community. We're failing the executive leaders that we're supposedly serving because we're not telling them what's required to get real agility. Instead, we're telling them what they want to hear. There's a problem with that. What we need to really be discussing with them is the constraint design. Okay, constraints that are too tight, there's no freedom, there's no agency. Bad. Constraints that are too loose, everything's a decision. That's also bad. That's chaos. Okay? But here you have the right size boundary. There's enough freedom inside the boundary to make decisions, but there's also a hard stop at the boundary. We need to be talking to executive leaders about boundary design and boundary management. If we do that, we will advance the Agile conversation throughout the world. So, in summary, if you want to scale engagement, you need to scale decision making. Scrum does that. Scrum at Scale does that. If you don't change the decision-making schema, there's not going to be a change in anything at all. Your frameworks don't scale. What scales is employee engagement and self-management of decisions at an appropriate level of scope. So in Scrum, there's a rule that the team and only the team decides how much goes into the sprint, right? Okay. So that's an example of a refactored decision right that teams didn't have before Scrum. Now they have this right to decide when, well, not when, but how much goes into the sprint. That has everything to do with engaging that team. If you do not execute on that rule, you will disengage them. Why? Well, number one, they're not deciding anymore. And number two, they go to the web and they find out that they're supposed to. And so it's a double negative when you mess with that rule. And you're also, a lot of you are smiling because it's so true. And here's what happens. The best people, the ones with the most options, they leave. They polish up their resume. And where do they go? They go to a competitor that's more agile. That's where they go. Why? Because they can. That is a double negative for us. First of all, we lose one of our best people, someone who could actually champion the Agile adoption. And then where do they go? They go to a competitor. It's a double-barrel negative for us. So we need to engage all the employees, but especially the top employees. Why? Because they're the people that can power the adoption. When we impose the stuff, all we're doing is giving them an invitation to leave. And that's exactly what they do. So with that in mind, I want to have a conversation with you about everything I discussed so far. This boundary management stuff is a big deal. This is a diagram right out of the book, Inviting Leadership. This is a hand-drawn diagram upon which the rendered diagram is based. Also in the book, I talk about biosemiotics. That's the signaling at the boundary of cellular life, right? So there's a lot going on at the boundary. This is a cell boundary. That yellow thing is a receptor. That receptor is sensing and responding to changes in the environment, like proteins and peptides that show up at the boundary. This receptor, receives these, and then it triggers processes inside. The boundary management matters. When you send an invitation, you're actually being respectful of the boundary of the receiver. So if you want to engage people, have them make a few decisions. That will help. Oh, and make sure those decisions are aligned on the flow of value. That will also help the whole organization. So with that, I'd like to kind of open it up for some questions and see what you think about these heresies of mine, and what you might have to say in terms of questions or reflections on the presentation so far.
All right, Dan, we got questions in Slido. We'll start at the top.
Okay.
Is there anything else except decision-making that needs to change in an organization in order to increase engagement?
Yes. The rule of the role of leaders is to define goals, and then define guardrails or boundaries for getting there, and then to maintain those constraints, and also to tell a coherent story. So here's what has to change. Leaders have to get much better at telling a coherent story about why, and leave the how to the management level, leave the what to the management level folks, and leave the how to the team level folks. Right? So if they engage in more generative leadership storytelling, people need a coherent story so they know what's going on. That's the job of leadership. So that's something else that has to change besides decision making, is leaders have to become much better at leadership storytelling to create the space and to confirm the why of what we're doing. In fact, I would go even further. I would say that any approach, open space agility, any framework that you have, any engagement model that you have, they will all fail if the leaders do not engage in generative, supporting, enabling leadership storytelling every single day. It's absolutely required for people to know like where they are. So there you go.
Excellent. I'm going to combine two questions because they kind of will have a similar relationship. So one is about the introverted employees on the team, and then the other one is about generally people that just want a punch list of orders. They don't want responsibility or ownership of making key authoritative decisions. They just want to work, do their job, and go home. So a combination of those questions.
Being accountable is actually thrilling. When you're a child, you're not accountable. But when you're a grown-up, you are. Anybody here who has children knows what I'm talking about. There's like before kids, and then there's like after kids. Before kids, you can do whatever you want, and you can kind of be immature. But then when you have a child, the child's totally, utterly dependent on you, and then you have to sort of soak up the reality of responsibility and accountability. So accountability is thrilling, and so is responsibility. So I would say if you're not willing to be accountable with your team, you know, I mean, you're not going to make a decision in isolation. You're going to make it with your team. I personally think that that's one of the coolest things you could possibly do at work, is to make a decision with a group of people and then go get it, go do the thing, right? So in the world that we're in now, the pace has changed so quick that we don't have a choice anymore. If you look back on human history, when things are not changing technologically, autocracy does just fine. It works. Central planning works well. You know, single point of decision making works well. In times of high change, that doesn't work. You have to decentralize the decision making to be able to sense and respond. So we're in a world where, you know, maybe you can find a place where you can be that way, but each passing day, more and more enterprises are requiring accountability and responsibility to sense and respond. So I would say that let's wish those folks well. Let's pack their camels and send them off to wherever it is they're going to be unaccountable and unresponsible.
There's some 8-track players out there somewhere, maybe even some Victrolas.
Right. Right.
All right, another question. You want to take another one?
Sure.
All right. Align decisions with the flow of value was a statement you made. What is value, and who is the person or group of people or entity that is receiving the value?
Right. So when we have value streams, we have primary streams of value that flow from our enterprise to our buying customers, We have different customer types, right? So we use user stories and personas to describe them. And what we're trying to do is delight them with our products and receive a fair compensation in return. And then there's also, along the value stream, there's supporting, there's value streams that support the primary one. Like they do internal processes that sort of buttress and support as we have this flow. In an ideal world, we want to get rid of all the clogs and all the impediments and have friction-free flow of value from customers, from us to customers. The first question, what is value? Wow, that's a multi-part series that we could do at Coaching Agile Journeys. What is value? How do we determine it? How do we measure it? Who gets to say what it is? I mean, that's a whole universe. I would say that the business agility thing, the agile thing in general, enterprise agility, is focused on answering that question because that changes over time. You know, we used to ride around in horse and buggies. We don't do that anymore. We used to have these little flip phones. We don't use them anymore either. So what is value really does pivot and move around over time. And in as little as 6 months, what's valuable can change. So what's our wider framework for sensing and responding to changes in what value is? And how do we deliver maximum value and reduce the impedance to value flow? My hypothesis is that the way we make decisions is a primary clog. So a lot of people here probably know about something called theory of constraints. Hold your hand up if you know about that. Okay, so about half. So theory of constraints says you look at a value stream or flow of value. You identify the biggest clog, the thing that's slowing down the flow, and you get rid of that. Okay, then you observe the system again. Notice that the value is flow is increased, which is, you know, what you were hoping for. And then you repeat the process. What's the biggest clog? And you remove it. I'm offering you the hypothesis that the biggest clog in most of the systems that you're operating in right now as coaches and as leaders is the way decisions are being made about the product. So we need to fundamentally refactor decisions, not just in service to employee engagement. That's not a good enough reason. It has to be in service to something, in service to increasing the flow of value through these value streams. We need to align decision-making with the flow of value. And that's actually the name of the game. That's how we win the game. So I hope that answers your question. Is there another one?
You're on mute, Jeff.
Cool. Yeah, we can give you another one. All right. A bit influenced by Peter Senge's famous book, Fifth Discipline. I'm reading it again these days. What about shared vision versus corporate ones? How do you explain that?
Shared vision requires that we have some values alignment as well, right? Because, I mean, that's fundamental. So shared vision, there's many different ways to achieve a shared vision. There's great thinkers who have created ways to, create a shared vision of the future. And a story of the future is a vision, right? So we're building a story about the future. That's what a vision actually is. That's properly the job of our highly authorized leaders, and why we can certainly crowdsource inputs into that. Ultimately, they own the decision about what's the vision. I mean, that's why we hire these people, right? To supply that. So when Steve Jobs, for example, left Next and came back to Apple, he immediately killed a whole bunch of products and just focused on 2 or 3 products, providing a vision to the whole organization about how we're gonna, how these products are gonna change the world, and how we're gonna do this thing around 2 or 3 big products, and all these other products are going away. Short term, for the next 2 or 3 years, this is what we're doing. So I like Peter Senge. He was a student of Jay Forrester. Jay Forrester was the inventor of system dynamics, and Peter Senge interpreted that to be system thinking. Yeah. Interestingly, system dynamics, the 3 major things in system dynamics are stocks, which are sort of like reservoirs that fill or half full, or they're half full or fully full. Stocks, delays, and flows. Those are the three elements of a system dynamics diagram: are stocks, flows, and delays. So this flow thing is a very big deal. System thinking is really about increasing the flows of the things that we say we want. Shared vision. I think a lot of that is initially formed by the leaders, and then we invite people to actually write that story, right? The story that doesn't exist. So in open space, we talk about like the invitation is like the first paragraph of the first chapter of an emerging story. Same thing with shared vision, right? So you bring the vision out, and then you say, okay, who wants to help make this vision come true? You know, that's the approach I would take, and that's where the shared vision would align with inviting leadership, employee engagement, self-management. So I hope that was a decent answer to your question.
Excellent. Yeah. Back to the value thing, I added that to the backlog for our podcast, for Open to be Agile podcast, because that'd be great. Just a whole segment riffing over value and defining value and that evolution. All right. So the next one is delegation game, a good way to get the team to decide who the decision makers are going to be within the team setting.
Are we referring to delegation game from Jürgen Appello?
Is
that what this is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a fan of that game. I think that game is focusing on the right things, and that we're not, okay, so look, if you go to Amazon and you look up books about authority, here's what you're going to find. Books about God. Books about autocracy, bureaucracy, and hierarchy. We need to de-risk or de-weaponize the terms authority and authorization, and start talking about them in common, polite conversation. So I really like that game because that's what that does. Here's what we have going on in the world today. So decisions are a certain kind of work. So the act of deciding is a kind of certain kind of work that certain people are authorized to do. Okay. So let's take delegation of responsibility without authority. Okay. There's a sender, there is a receiver. Here's a delegation of responsibility without authority. Here's the results you get from that. All the things we say we don't want. Here's the delegation of responsibility with authority, okay? And here's all the good stuff you get out of that. So talking about delegation, talking about authorization, talking about leadership, which we define in the Inviting Leadership book as anyone who's in on a decision that affects the whole group is a leader. So if you influence decisions that affect the whole group, you're engaging, you're on the leadership team, formally or informally. So in general, I like the delegation game, and I specifically like the delegation game, and in general, I like the wider conversation about a discussion about authorized decision rights. And the Scrum is a prefabricated decision rights schema. And if you look at it that way, it's a whole new way to look at it. Just for fun, go through the Scrum guide and pick off all the statements that say who's authorized to decide what. It's a whole new way to looking at the Scrum guide. That's my challenge to you. So I like the delegation game, and I offer you that comment, the wider comment as well.
Well, you kind of just challenged me to reread the Scrum guide from a different point of view. So.
Oh yeah. Count how many times the word decision or decisions shows up in the Scrum guide. Yeah. Are there more questions?
Make a drinking game out of it. Have some fun, you know. With liberating structures, one way to approach all this.
Yeah, so liberating structures are meeting formats. So instead of talking about liberating structures, which is a kind of brand, let's talk about meeting formats, which is more about design and architecture, okay? anyone can design a meeting at any time. Meetings are extremely powerful. For example, in the Agile community today, we're doing, there's this Agile leadership thing going around where we individual leaders show up at a class and they get some individual leader training. Maybe it's a private class and the whole group is there, but it's not like a requirement. If you're going to teach leaders how to do this stuff, you can't teach them in isolation because they make decisions in a social setting, in a social context. So meetings are a very powerful way to deliver learning without a lecture. Everyone who's on this call, if you want, I will arrange with Coaching Agile Journeys to give you a goodie from this book. I'll give you Appendix B out of this book, which is a meeting format called the Authority Circle. It's a modified fishbowl that teaches leaders how to open space and teaches them how nothing bad happens when they do that. It's a very interesting exercise that is for the leaders, not for the rest of the people. So there's an inner circle, there's an outer circle. The people in the inner circle are are highly authorized deciders. There's 3 or 4 big issues on the wall about what we're facing for the next 6 months, and then we handle each issue in turn. Each issue has 2 phases. Phase 1, the inner circle discusses what they think about the issue as if nobody else is in the room. And everyone else is eavesdropping on authority talking to itself about something facing the company. In the second phase, there's an open seat in the center, in the inner circle. And anyone from the outer circle who's listening, someone who presumably reports to one of these people on the inside, can enter the inner circle and offer a reflection, a suggestion, a question, a comment, or raise a concern. This is an extremely powerful way to teach leaders how they're not going to get anything on them if they open up just a little bit of space, okay? If you open up just a little bit of space, you're going to wind up with a whole lot of goodness in terms of engagement. So this is how that looks, okay? You're all going to get a copy of that through Coaching Agile Journeys, Appendix B from the Inviting Leadership book. So that's an example of a design meeting format. It's actually a modified fishbowl. What we need to do with all these things is open them up with open source licensing. If you publish a meeting format under some other license, no one can modify it. Nobody can make an improvement, or maybe they can make an improvement, but they can't commercialize it. That's a crime. Why? Because if you can't commercialize your meeting design, what incentive is there to innovate? I mean, you have creditors, don't you? Don't you need to pay them? Yeah, you do. You don't have to make a whole bunch of money, but you've got to, pay your creditors. So if I can pay my creditors off of a meeting design, I'm going to go and do that. So if I publish the Authority Circle under a closed source license, you cannot do anything with it except use it. But you can't create a derivation, you can't create innovation. So with any meeting formats under any brand name, I am for open source licensing and I am opposed to closed source licensing. So my guidance to you is to look carefully at the licensing terms of any meeting formats that are in any collection and ask yourself why those things are being published under a closed license. Meetings are super powerful. Open space, fishbowl, World Cafe, other meeting formats, super powerful. You can generate a tremendous amount of social learning through meetings in meeting formats. So this is actually a hot button with me and a very hot topic, meeting design. I'm going to offer you a couple things about this. Meetings are actually games. So a good game has rules. A good game has a goal or goals. A good game has a way to track your progress or to get feedback. And a good game is opt-in to play. So we're here on Coaching Agile Journeys. We're in a meeting right now. What's the goal of this meeting? Well, last time I checked, it was about how to scale employee engagement. We're all going to learn about that. That's our goal. What are the rules? It starts at 12. It ends at 1 o'clock. Right? How do we track our progress? We track our progress through time and through task, right? So you can check in with yourself and say, you know, how am I doing? Am I learning anything about scaling engagement? If I am, I'm going to stay engaged. If not, I'm probably going to check out. And then we can check in on time. Like right now we have like 20 minutes to go, but it's probably more like 15 because we need a 5-minute kind of checkout. So this is a game. It's a well-formed game where you're invited into something that's very clearly defined. You know how you're going to track your progress. You know what the goal is. But most meetings and most organizations are, pardon my French, crappy games. Fuzzy goals, fuzzy rules. No clear way to track your progress. And definitely not opt-in. You have to go to those meetings usually. So what we really need to do is we need to radically redefine meeting design around the 4 properties of a good game, and then a whole bunch of good things happen. And oh, by the way, the Scrum Guide actually says something about games. Does anyone know about this?
Does it say like the rules of the game or something?
Yeah, it says the rules of the game right on the cover of the Scrum Guide. So apparently Scrum is a game, and I'm going to show that in the share. And can you see what I just shared? See it?
Yeah.
So Scrum's a game. So let's talk about this for a minute. What's the goal of Scrum? Deliver maximum value in the minimum amount of time. What are the rules of Scrum? For the product owner to be successful, everyone must respect his or her decisions, plus a whole bunch of other rules about decision rights. How do we track feedback in Scrum? Here, let me just go fast. We go to the daily Scrum, we go to the retrospective, we go to the sprint review. That's where we track our progress. And then the 4th one, supposed to be opt-in to play if it's a good game. So now we know why Scrum doesn't work. Because we make it mandatory and we don't implement all the rules. So all of those things work against us. This is what actually happens. Okay, so can I take some more questions now?
Yeah.
I hope I can.
Yeah, I'm gonna combine a couple of them again. This is mainly about leaders and leadership cultures and decision making from leaders.
Okay.
Micromanagers, the power trippers. There was one, the Taylorists, who believe, you know, people are robots, cogs are monkeys, and that there's no link to employees creating value, the values in the product and the system kind of thing. And then there was another one of with the circle, the exercise, the manager that just doesn't say, I want to facilitate that, just thwarts that. No, we're not doing that. We're not going to try that. So they are deauthorizing that, and they refuse to do that. So micromanagers, power trippers, people that don't value them, like, how do you break through to them and make this happen, or don't you?
Well, first of all, people do change their minds. So you don't give up on people. That's number one. Number two, maybe you're asking for too much. Have you ever been invited into something you don't really clearly understand? I have. And it's always hard to say yes or no to that kind of invitation because you're not really sure what it is they're offering you. You know, an invitation is an opportunity or an offer to go somewhere or do something. Okay, so if that's not well formed or they're asking for too much, you know, I'm going to say no, or I don't know how to respond. So I would say for those types of people who are resisting, some of them may be on a glide path to retirement. They like things the way they are. They're not too eager to change or refactor decision rights to align with the flow of value, to increase the flow of value, because it's really about flow of value to them, you know, not to the organization as a whole. I would say the group process, specifically meetings, meeting formats like open space are extremely powerful for helping to tip things. So we know for a fact that we need the leadership team on board. So here's my guidance on this. the people in the middle, not the top level, not at the team level, the managers, they kind of hold the social contracts and they kind of hold the culture in their hands, okay? And they can block. So to get the whole organization moving, first, if we're going to transform the organization, we have to transform the leadership team first. That's usually 30 or 40 people in a typical company, influencers and direct, formally authorized people who make decisions and make the organization move. They're in roles that are highly authorized for decision making. There has to be a transformation of that group first. I use meetings. I use whole group leadership meetings for that, and I put them through certain experiences that generate what's called good stress. So, for example, if you look up this word, EU, stress. EU comes from euphoria. Stress is stress. It means good stress. Some stress is good. So I like to take the leadership teams and put them on mildly and positively stressful learning experiences. And once that leadership team's aligned, you can get the management group aligned, because now we're all going to go out with one vision, one message, one set of stories, one commander's intent, so to speak, and you'll see people realign around this thing or find a greener pasture when the top people demonstrate through these signal events, that what I call signal events, that they are dead serious about moving forward, right? And the other thing is, they're going to set aside a lot of decisions for their own execution. They're also going to engage in the design of the right size boundaries, this kind of thing, right? Because if you don't do that, it doesn't matter what your vision is. Everyone has to get engaged in it, and they get engaged through helping to write that story. So I'm going to offer you something. I think if the top leadership, the top 30 or 40 people, invite people into writing the story of the future, being characters in that story, and being even authors of some of that story, all those folks that are, happy with the way things are going to become suddenly uncomfortable as they sense the culture shifting around them into this new direction. So I wouldn't deal with them individually. I would let the culture take care of it. And the way that you're going to let the culture take care of it is by refactoring decision rights with intent to change culture, right? The primary goal is to align decisions on the flow of value. A direct benefit of that and a secondary effect is going to be culture will change. Okay, culture will change when decision rights change, and all the people that are resisting will either be swept along by it or find someplace else to be unaccountable and unresponsible.
Maybe explains why there's such a high turnover ratio for jobs in a modern market today.
Right. Well, we're in a period of tremendous change, right? So what's happening is there's a lot of turnover across industries, and people are moving around. When the economy is good, especially if you don't have an open culture where you're actively engaging people to make decisions that affect their work directly, right? All aligned on the flow of value, you get to fail, because when the economy loosens up, people start to move around. And the quickest way to make more money isn't to stay where you are, it's to go somewhere else and get a 20% bump, because you're not going to get it here because of policy.
And I think they come in sold on the notion that this is going to be the place that I'm going to be empowered to make decisions. We went through the interview, they sold me on that. And then the honeymoon wears off real quick after a few months go by. They're like,
right.
Wait a minute, I'm not as empowered as I thought I'd be. And then there's a slide from there that happens.
That's right. So what we need to do is we need to weave in more invitations to make decisions. Yeah, delegation's still going to happen, but let's shift things. This is the typical organization. This is total totalitarian rule, autocracy, and this is total chaos. Okay, so these are two polar extremes. This is where most organizations are. They're in here. They almost, at the midpoint, things are pretty good, but mostly they're over here on this side. What we need to do is get over here, past the midpoint. Yeah, we still do some things over on this side, but we've really shifted into not total anarchy, but controlled, well-designed boundaries that are well-maintained, that are communicated clearly every single day, like some of the Agile frameworks that we have. Mm-hmm. If we did those things right, we'd get 100% increase in the things we're measuring. One of the problems with the Agile world that I want to say before we finish up, if you do what's called surface Agile, or what I call surface Agile, you could get 10 or 15% improvement in everything you're measuring. And a lot of organizations are happy with that. That's a crime. We're selling incremental change that's temporary as transformation. Transformation is when you get a double out of the things you're measuring. And that's possible through the refactoring of decision rights. And a good example of that would be Scrum or Scrum at Scale. But this idea that, 10 or 15% is good enough and we don't have to change anything, that resonates with a lot of people. So that's part of what we're up against here. Okay, so I think I want to pause now and just make sure that we're doing my management stuff.
Yeah, we're 12:51 right now, and I think you could hit one more real quick because it's not real deep.
Yep.
It's more example driven.
Yep.
It's actually 2 examples that have been asked for. One, if you could provide an example of a popular modern day leader that's really good at storytelling today, like you said. And then the other example is, could you point to a company that is using open leadership culture that you mentioned successfly today?
Sure. The first storyteller that comes to mind is the McChrystal, the author McChrystal, A Team of Teams, where he spells out, look, this is how this works. Right? So the military is actually a great source of inspiration and information about this. I want everyone on the call to write this down. There's something called the C2, that's a letter C in the numeral 2, journal, the C2 journal. It comes out of the Command and Control Research Center in the Department of Defense of the USA. So it's CCRP, Command and Control Research Project. And they published something called the C2 Journal. The C2 Journal is loaded with stories of how to engage decision at the edge in theaters of war. And when you get this wrong, when you get decision rights wrong in a military situation, your people die. So if you want some good guidance, go there. They don't mention software even one time. They also say that control is an emergent property, not an option to be selected. That's actually a whole conversation for another time, control being an emergent property. But McChrystal is a great storyteller. And then what's an example of an organization that's using these open principles? I would say that Red Hat is probably at the top of that list. And how interesting that they're all about open source licensing as well, right? So some people I know work at Red Hat, and they're saying that the culture there is super open, uses open principles, and that's probably my best example. And there's others that I've worked for, like I worked for different companies like Intuit, Adobe, and some of these other firms who are using these techniques primarily with open space to implement open leadership. So there's 2. The one thing I want to say about this in the end really quickly is there's one professional hazard that we can't defend against, even if we do perfect work with leaders to bring all this stuff to life, okay? And here's the hazard, occupational hazard, regime change. If the people making decisions changes, if private equity comes in, if there's an acquisition, if a real champion leader leaves and is replaced, there's no defense against that, folks. So don't blame yourself if regime change changes everything in 3 days. I don't know of any way to defend against that. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, Daniel, that is awesome. All really, really, really good content. And I just want to say on behalf of our audience, we've had 54 to 56 people on this entire time. And I just really want to say a huge thank you for your great content that you've shared with us. And, this isn't the end of these types of discussions. This is actually only the beginning. So really quickly, I want to share with everybody who's on the call, before you guys take off, just posted our website, coachingagilejourneys.com. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show you. If you go to coachingagilejourneys.com, you can sign up for our next regular event. So we have one event a month. And so that's on the homepage. You'll see that there. Bob Woods is talking about the art of finding the smart. But right here under open leadership, one of our first sections there, if you go ahead and go in that direction, what you're going to see is this whole series that we've got lined out. And so today is the February 28th one, Daniel, and it's a great start to this series. But then on March 25th, Harrison Owen is going to come talk about open space in organizations. If there's anybody who understands that you want to hear from as a de facto expert, Harrison Owen is going to bring some great content in that talk. Daniel, you're going to be back with us again April 8th. You're going to talk about open space agility, a little bit of explanation there. That's going to be wonderful. And then we have Niels coming on April 22nd, open approaches for very fast organizational transformation. And so look at those, take a look as you scroll down on the page a little bit. You've got the registration links right there. You can register for one session, register for all of them, whatever it is that you can make. This is just part of our journey. As Heidi said at the beginning, we're reflecting on some of our feedback we got. And this is something that many of our people said, boy, we'd love to talk more about that. So we're going to dive down into it. So it's going to be a great series. Visit us at coachingagilejourneys.com. Also, we have the podcast. Some of the questions we didn't get to in this series, I think Jeff's going to pick up and we're going to address in future podcast episodes. So the story doesn't stop here. We're going to keep going. We've got more open space conversations coming up, more agility discussion that I think is going to provide great value. So I'll pause and look to the other co-hosts. Anything else I've left out before we wrap up this session? Heidi, Kristen, Jeff, anything else you guys want to add?
Just one more thing. So we believe in the open leadership movement and sort of the ideas that Daniel was talking about. And that's why we're so we're going to go on and definitely have those other leaders. So go to our site, coachingagilejourneys.com/open leadership. But Daniel, do you want to just wrap it up the last 2 minutes with anything else you want to add about the Open Leadership Symposium happening in Boston and any other special interesting speakers that will be there?
Yes. So yeah, we're doing a 2-day event on open leadership in Boston on May 14th and 15th. And I put the web URL in there. The second day, you'll be able to attend 3 90-minute workshops that you'll be able to pick from a menu of 7 or 8 things. So every single workshop will be presented twice to maximize your ability to make a custom schedule to see exactly what you want. And the first day, we have some great speakers who will be teaching the second day. So Doug Kirkpatrick wrote the book Beyond Empowerment, and he also wrote some other books on self-management. He founded the Self-Management Institute. He travels all over the world teaching executive leaders about self-management. He's one of our speakers. Niels Flaging, who is acknowledged as a highly astute organizational design consultant in Europe. He's coming to teach us something called Open Space Beta. There's a fellow named Ron Cortell, who's built something called Fast Agile that's based on open space. It's basically how to create teams and team compositions through the use of open space. He'll be teaching that. I'll be teaching on open space agility, inviting leadership, and open space itself. Mike Burrows, who's well known for his work in the Kanban community, and he has a book called Agenda Shift. He's given a 2-day workshop after the conference and 2 90-minute sessions during the conference. This conference basically operationalizes these concepts that we talked about on this call. So if you like this call, you love the conference. And if you buy tickets now, they're as cheap as they'll be because the prices gently rise as tickets are sold. So I hope you'll consider coming to the Open Leadership Forum on May 14 and 15. I'm sure Coaching Agile Journeys will send you more information on that over email. But save the date, May 14 and 15, and I hope to see you there.
Oh, Heidi, you're on.
Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you so much for being a part of our Coaching Agile Journeys community. Thanks again, Daniel, and all the co-hosts and attendees. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
I appreciate you guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
See you next time.